That's me. My name's Brandon, and for the past week I've been living my life like I'm straight out of the 90s. Now you might be thinking how I got myself into this situation. Well, to answer that question, I should probably go back to the very beginning to when it all started. I was born in the mid-80s, so by the time the 90s hit, I was 6 years old. Just the right age as a kid to soak in the decade in all its glory. Okay, maybe it wasn't all that glorious as a kid. Like any era, the 90s had its fair share of unforgettable moments. Bill Clinton's presidency and impeachment, the O.J. Simpson trial, the Gulf War, classic movie and music releases, and a tech revolution that brought us the internet, mobile phones, CDs, and legendary gaming systems like the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. And that is just scratching the surface. If you're an adult or a kid that grew up in the 90s like I did, you probably have a soft spot for certain things, whether it was the music, the fashion, the movies, or the ridiculous amount of time spent rewinding VHS tapes. And lately, it feels like the 90s are bigger than ever. And maybe that's just Gen X and millennials looking back at their younger days through rose-tinted glasses, or maybe the decade really was all that in a bag of chips. So to find out, I'm putting it to the test. For 1 week, I'm ditching the modern world and fully immersing myself in the life of a 1990s man. Now, I'm not going to concentrate on politics or the economy. I'm here for the lifestyle, the hair, the fashion, the pop culture, and the day-to-day routine. So I hope you're ready because we're about to travel back in time to the 1990s. It's the early 90s. The Simpsons just wrapped up its first full season, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air made its debut, and theaters were packed for movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Meanwhile, MC Hammer had everyone dancing to Can't Touch This. And you didn't just hear these cultural shifts, you saw them. The hairstyles, the fashion, everything reflected the era. I was only 6 or 7 at the time, and you're damn right I had my Hammer pants. I also spent my time watching Darkwing Duck, Toxic Crusaders, Family Matters, and the disappointing finale of Alf. Meanwhile, my musical tastes ranged from Weird Al to more Weird Al. Now, the goal is to live like someone from the 90s. So everything I'll be doing will be from the 90s, from listening to the music, watching the movies, and using the technology. And the tech part is not going to be that easy. They didn't have big flat screen TVs, modern computers, and they definitely didn't have smartphones. So before I fully commit to the 90s lifestyle, I'm going to be using modern technology to find what I need. We take it for granted now, but back in the early 90s, something like this wasn't possible. Although eBay was founded on September 3rd, 1995 as Auction Web and officially became eBay in 1997, it was still common if you wanted to find something vintage, you'd have to head to a thrift store, a yard sale, or maybe a flea market. Things were less accessible. It was a treasure hunt. It felt more rewarding finding something. Today, it's all too easy to find retro and vintage, which is a huge market. But back then, it was less about vintage and more about looking forward to the future. But now that we've made it to the future, a lot of us clearly just want to go back. And speaking of going back, my next step is to transform myself into someone you'd see at that time. But what made people look like they were from the 90s? Well, that could all depend on where you lived, your age, and who your influences were. But when it came to hairstyles, there was a handful of very recognizable looks. And some, no doubt, you might even rock yourself. The 90s brought the curtains, becoming an iconic middle-parted look made famous by Leonardo DiCaprio, Nick Carter, and every boy band ever. It was floppy and slightly greasy. The Caesar cut, short, cropped with a straight fringe, George Clooney's signature look on the show ER. You'd also see frosted tips rocked by Justin Timberlake and Mark McGrath. The buzz cut was popular with musical artists like Tupac and LL Cool J. The flat top was still around, with Will Smith sporting it on The Fresh Prince, high, boxy, and bold. And a newcomer, especially in the early 90s, was the grunge bedhead, longish, messy, and unbothered, thanks to Kurt Cobain. Then there was the cornrows and braids, popularized by Allen Iverson and Exhibit. And lastly, you might have seen some holdouts from the 80s like the mullet, business in the front, party in the back. And much like hairstyles, facial hair trends were pretty diverse. It was common to see stubble, which was a big part of the grunge movement. The goatee was another look you would commonly see, along with the soul patch, chin strap, and maybe even more of a retro look, like the handlebar mustache. but I'm gonna draw some inspiration from my dad on this one. He rocked a mustache throughout the 90s, which is more of a holdout from the 80s, but when you think about it, a decade doesn't magically transform into an entirely different way of living, so the early 90s could be seen as very comparable to the late 80s. So I'm getting closer to that 90s look, but now it's time to talk about style. And there was something that just released that made quite the impression on me as a kid. Did everyone look like this in the 90s? No. But Ice Ice Baby did top the charts, and this was proof that the 80s influences were present in the early 90s. But there was something on the horizon that would change everything. It's September 10th, 1991, and Nirvana releases Smells Like Teen Spirit. Little did they know a whole generation would latch onto this look, sound, and attitude. Teens quickly adapted to caring less about fitting in, despised sellouts, and no longer strive for success and money like you might have seen in the 80s. And Vanilla Ice was arguably seen as one of the biggest sellouts of the 90s, so my next step is to try to fit in. But it wasn't cool to fit in the 90s. I don't know, it was all a little confusing back then. With the popularity of grunge on the rise, it was common for teens and young adults to shop at thrift stores for their clothes. Fashion was becoming more about anti-fashion, looking like you don't care. Ripped jeans, baggy tees, and flannel shirts were the go-to look. The days of looking preppy were over, and the rise of looking grungy was here. Now it has to be said that not everyone jumped on the grunge bandwagon, but I was born and raised in Oregon, so there's almost a hometown pride knowing that grunge came from the Pacific Northwest. So I definitely feel right at home looking just like this. The Seattle scene became the epicenter of the grunge movement in the early 90s. Bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains blew up and was commonly referenced as the Seattle Sound. You would now see groups of people donning hand-me-down clothes, Converse shoes, and playing hacky sack in the park, trying their hardest not to fit into society, and it really hasn't changed much up here, which is funny because it's even referenced in the show Portlandia. The dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. The dream is alive. Or if you want to live back in the 90s, well, you move up to Portland or maybe even Seattle. And when you're up here, you can feel that. The overall attitude, the style, and really the feeling of the whole place is very much stuck in the 90s. There was one simple rule to the grunge movement: don't sell out. But wait a minute, time out. I was just a kid back in the early 90s, so my biggest concern wasn't about selling out, it was video games. There were two notable releases in 1989, the Game Boy and the Sega Genesis. Both saw extreme success not only upon release, but also through the early 90s. The Game Boy for its handheld on-the-go convenience, and the Genesis for its cooler alternative feel that fit right in with the early 90s. And great marketing like Genesis does what Nintendo don't. I didn't know it at the time, but there was a war being waged, a bit war, and I had chosen my side, the Super Nintendo. With a revved-up graphical upgrade to 16 bits over the now out-of-date 8-bit NES, this new state-of-the-art gaming system was what dreams were made of. I spent most of my early days sipping on Capri Sun, sucking on Ring Pops, and playing games like Super Mario Kart. Life was simple. But that was life through the eyes of a kid. If you were a teenager, you had other things on your mind. But those cars were most likely out of reach for most kids, so you're more likely to see something like this, a 1993 Suzuki Sidekick. Including four-wheel drive, four doors, and a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine, this car might not have been a fancy sports car, but it would get you anywhere you wanted to go. With the economy in a slight recession, imported cars with more economic gas mileage and reliability became very popular. Maybe you had this exact car, or maybe not. But no matter what car you had, your first car is most likely still one of your favorites. And since this is the car I'll be driving around all week, this is definitely my favorite car. Getting your first car allowed new ways to hang out with your friends and allowed total freedom. All you had to do next was pick up the phone and dial.
Hello.
Hi, Mr. Sanders. I was wondering if Johnny was available.
Who is this?
Well, it's Brandon, Johnny's best friend.
Hey, Johnny, your little boyfriend is on the phone.
Back then, you didn't have the availability of social media, so you had to get your social interactions in person or over the phone. A quick phone call to see if your friends were available, and you'd schedule a time and place to meet up. Most likely, that would be at your local mall. So I'm here at the Lloyd Center Mall in Portland, Oregon, and it first opened on August 1st, 1960 as the biggest open-air mall in the United States. And since then, it's gone through different changes and looks, and I haven't been to this mall in, God, I don't even remember, probably since I was in my early teens, but I'm about to head in to see what it's like. And one of the most well-known features it had was the big indoor ice skating rink. And as you can see, it's still very popular. Maybe not back in his glory days, but hey, there's still people here, which is a good sign. There's probably stuff back from the 90s still in here somewhere. So since me and my brother grew up in a small town, it's around like 3,000 to 4,000 people, we would have to take a trip up to Portland, Oregon to the Lloyd Center here to find pretty obscure stuff, mainly like Dragon Ball Z VHSs or certain toys like from StarCraft or Spawn. And there's one place called Suncoast that we would go to that was right here in this mall. Still see stores like this, Gambit's Games and Anime or FWC. It's no Suncoast, but you know what? They're still trying to keep it alive, which I appreciate. They still fucking have it. They have Orange Julius. Oh, I gotta get an Orange Julius. Not only could you shop at the mall, but you'd also come here to hang out with friends and also see the latest movie releases. And in the 90s, something came along that would change how movies were made forever: computer-generated imagery. CGI first appeared back in the 1970s with films like Westworld, but it wasn't until the 1980s that filmmakers really began experimenting with it, using it more often and on larger scale in movies like Tron and The Abyss. Then came the 1990s. Computers were getting more powerful and suddenly CGI started to look real. Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park blew audiences away with visuals that felt lifelike. It was a turning point, one that opened the door to a whole new era of filmmaking. And since most people had small CRT TVs in their home, you would have to go to the movie theaters to see them on the big screen with surround sound and cutting-edge visuals. And a lot of times, that would be at your local mall. Now this is completing the experience, sipping on an Orange Julius in the food court. But there is something that's missing. As you can tell, there's no one here. And that's really a theme throughout this whole mall is, it's just not what it used to be. And after the mall, if you didn't happen to grab any food at the food court, it was only natural to pick up some fast food. The 90s marked a golden era for fast food. Chains like McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, and KFC were more than just restaurants, they were cultural institutions. With drive-thrus booming and marketing aimed squarely at kids, fast food became a fixture of everyday life. Happy Meals came with collectible toys, ads featured Saturday morning cartoon tie-ins, and everything was supersized. But while burgers and fries ruled the scene, Subway was quietly rising as the so-called healthier fast food alternative. Its made-to-order sandwiches and eat fresh branding appealed to a growing wave of health-conscious customers. By the late 90s, Subway was opening more locations than any other chain, positioning itself as the counterpoint to greasy burgers and fried food. I remember when Subway opened in the small town I grew up in, it quickly became the go-to spot for everyone to grab their meals, and that was pretty evident too because everyone's cars smelled like the footlongs and was also riddled with all the packaging from Subway. Across the board, fast food in the 90s was fast, cheap, and everywhere. It was on our TV screens, in our schools, and on every road trip. For many, it defined an entire era of eating, and in a way, growing up. So we made it to the mid-90s, and things were changing. Hip-hop wasn't just music, it was a movement. Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. were topping the charts, defining the sound of a generation, and the styles were representing how people were influenced by it. On TV, Friends had us quoting catchphrases, and The X-Files had us looking to the skies trusting no one. Meanwhile, Hollywood was getting a digital upgrade. Toy Story made history as the first fully computer-animated film. Jumanji, Batman Forever, and Mortal Kombat lean into effects like never before. In fact, 1995 was a stacked year for movies in general. We got Seven, Heat, Clueless, Braveheart, and a Goofy movie. And one film in particular spawned one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time, GoldenEye. Gaming was evolving fast. While it was common to play Oregon Trail in school and head to your local arcade to play Street Fighter, Ninja Turtles, or Simpsons, home consoles were starting to take over. On September 9, 1995, the PlayStation was released in North America. It launched the PlayStation release with a small but varied lineup of games, and around 100,000 units were sold in the first weekend, which was considered a major success. But Nintendo was hot on their heels. On September 29, 1996, the Nintendo 64 hit North America. It launched with Pilot Wings 64, and Super Mario 64, a game that completely redefined 3D gaming. So with this guy popped onto screen and my brother and I saw it for the first time, it's hard to put into words just how crazy this was. First, we were seeing real dinosaurs running around on the big screen in Jurassic Park, and now we're controlling a real-life Mario. Of course, looking back at it now and comparing it to modern games, the graphics are basic and the camera angles can seriously suck at times, but when it really came down to it, it wasn't the graphics that made it a classic. It was just fun. And playing it today, it's still fun. Now there has to be something said about how video games were back in the 90s. You didn't have access to thousands of games on Steam or on Game Pass like you do today, and you didn't have access to thousands of reviews and gameplay footage to sway your opinion. And sure, you might have looked at a Nintendo Power or PlayStation magazine to see some screenshots and read the review, but overall it was a leap of faith. So at that point, it was either buy it, which wasn't cheap especially as a kid, or the more common option, rent it. And for most people, that would mean a trip to your local Blockbuster. Blockbuster was founded back in 1985 by David Cook, opening the first store in Dallas, Texas, and by the late 90s, it was starting to peak with close to 9,000 stores nationwide. This is the last Blockbuster store in existence located in Bend, Oregon, and it makes you think, if Blockbuster would have bought Netflix back in 2000 for $50 million like they had the chance to, would we still see Blockbuster on every corner? We'll never know. But as it stands, this is just a relic from the past, and I'm glad we still have it. Although local video stores were still around, Blockbuster made movie and video game rentals fast, easy, and accessible to everyone. Walking through the aisles and browsing the latest rental options felt like a weekly ritual. The smell of popcorn, the buzz of CRT screens playing previews, the soft hum of tapes being rewound, and the blue and yellow glow of the signage. It all felt like a mini adventure. But nothing topped the moment you got your own rental card. That little blue and yellow badge wasn't just plastic, it was independence, power, and the key to Friday night freedom. A true 90s rite of passage. Once you rented your game, the next step was to call your friends over your landline for an all-nighter to play it, which back then could only be experienced through couch co-op. No online matchmaking, no headsets, just you, your buddies, and a tangle of controller cords sprawled across the living room floor. The glow of the tube TV lit up the room while you took turns, trash talked, and made up house rules as you went. It was chaotic, it was loud, and it was perfect. But video games weren't the only thing you could do with your friends. The mid-90s also saw the rise of extreme sports. In 1995, the X Games came out, and suddenly everyone wanted to be a skateboarder, including me. And clearly, I'm not very good. Skateboarding was a huge deal back when I was a kid, so I tried my hardest to learn how to do it. But after hundreds of attempts to try to learn how to ollie, I finally quit. But thankfully, there was an alternative for me. By the late 90s, skateboarding had found its way into living rooms of millions with the release of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater in 1999. The game brought skate culture to a whole new audience, blending real-world tricks with high-speed gameplay. It became a phenomenon, not just a way to experience skateboarding, but to live it, virtually. It wasn't about the sport anymore, it was a lifestyle, a global community, and for many, it was their first introduction to the world of extreme sports. But there was another board that was picking up speed in the 90s, and that was snowboarding. Snowboarding wasn't necessarily new to the 90s. It was created back in 1965 by Sherman Poppin and was called the Snurfer. But it gained a lot of popularity in the 80s and continued on throughout the 90s. But with the release of the Winter X Games in 1997, snowboarding solidified its place as the new extreme sport you could perform on the mountain.
Anything's extreme, you can get definitely extreme. I mean, anything like this, definitely extreme.
So naturally, in our teens, me and my brother piled into our old beat-up Subaru station wagon, put on some corn, and headed to the mountain. And since I'm living in the 90s, that's exactly what we're about to do. Go! extreme as the 90s, but we tried our best.
We went extreme for 40-year-old bodies.
Yeah, that's true. For 40-year-olds, yeah, it was pretty extreme for us. As you can see, these boots are falling apart. And the reason being is these are actually from the 90s. I got these probably when I was around 14 or 15 years old, and I've had them ever since. Vans. I mean, nothing says the 90s more than Vans. But there was another sport that pretty much lived and died in the mid to late 90s. Inline skating came crashing onto the scene with the help of Scott and Brennan Olsen founding Rollerblade Inc. in the 1980s, updating a design that actually dated all the way back to the 1760s, invented by a Belgian named Jean-Joseph Merlin. With slick marketing and perfect timing, rollerblades quickly became the new kids on the block. Aggressive inline skating took off, riding the same rebellious energy and carving out its own space in the underground sports scene. These rollerblades aren't from the 90s. Back in the day, I was rocking the K2 Fatty Pros, but unfortunately, I couldn't track any down that were in my size for this video. But it's crazy to think how fast rollerblading caught on back then. And when it did, I jumped right in, buying the magazines, watching movies like Brink, and really have a goal of becoming a pro aggressive inline skater. And as you can tell, that didn't work out. And that's probably for the best, because rollerblading pretty much died out in the late 90s. It was a quick rise and a quick fall. But as fun as extreme sports were, there was something creeping into every household around the world. Little did we know, life as we knew it was about to change forever. In the mid to late 90s, the internet was a frontier, a digital Wild West full of possibility, chaos, and wonder. Dial-up connections screeched to life as millions of users logged on through bulky desktop computers. And for some people, it was a pretty confusing time.
That little mark with the A and then the ring around it?
Computers are supposed to make life easier.
The way it would change our lives may have been exaggerated.
Websites were simple, often little more than blocks of text and pixelated images, yet they felt like portals to endless new worlds. Services like AOL, Yahoo, and Netscape Navigator were household names, guiding curious explorers through a sprawling, untamed landscape. Early chat rooms and message boards gave birth to the first digital communities, where friendships were forged between strangers separated by thousands of miles. It was an era of discovery where every click felt like an adventure, and even the smallest website could hold a hidden treasure. Email revolutionized communication, instant messaging introduced a new kind of immediacy, and the online marketplaces like eBay hinted at the beginnings of a global digital economy. There were no influencers, no streaming services, only raw connection, built one line of code at a time. The internet of the 90s wasn't just a tool, it was a new frontier for creativity, expression, and the human connection, reshaping how people lived, learned, and dreamed one pixel at a time. We didn't know it then, but we were standing at the edge of a revolution. Like most people, my family had some computers over the course of the 90s. A Commodore 64, Gateway 2000, which you might remember came in a cow-printed box, and an Asus. So of course, me and my brother quickly started to use them to play online video games like Quake, Warcraft 2, and StarCraft. We also started to communicate with some of our friends through ICQ and AIM, which was pretty mind-blowing. Hours and hours were now spent using it, to the dismay of anyone trying to call, getting the dreaded busy tone. And as you can see, I purchased this setup here, which is a bit of a Frankenstein of different parts, but it's something similar to what you would see back in the 90s. And using it now, there's definitely a certain charm about its simplicity. But overall, using it this past week has been a trip down memory lane, and it's a reminder why we all got sucked into this virtual realm. And that's exactly what happened to me and my brother. The internet allowed us to reach far beyond our small town we grew up in. Suddenly our aspirations started to shift. We began dreaming of bigger things. So with the help from our dad, we started making films and started selling those films on VHS tapes over the internet through a website my brother designed. Now we shot them on these cameras, the XO1 and GO1. And it's crazy to think about it now, but this XO1 shot in 420p and cost nearly $4,000. Today, I shoot my content on the Sony FX3, full 4K resolution, and it costs less than this XO1 did. But filmmaking wasn't the only thing we had going on. We started a band inspired by groups like Metallica, 9 Inch Nails, Korn, and Pantera. We called it Blind Automatic, and tucked away in all that creative chaos was a song called Infernal Machine, a track we never finished. Now, it's been sitting on the shelf unfinished for almost 30 years, so to truly complete this journey, we're gonna head into the studio to finish what we started all those years ago. And to do that, we reached out to Derek Williams. He's been a musician and teacher for the last 20 years and has toured around the world with artists like Thomas Rhett, Mike Posner, and Leanne Rimes. So we met up at his studio and got to sit down with him to get a bit of a backstory to his experience in the 90s.
Yeah, so my name's Derek Williams. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1984. I started playing guitar when I was 8. I got an electric guitar when I was 10, and immediately you have to get in a band. I mean, the whole idea about getting a musical instrument in the 90s was I need to get this thing so I can participate in a band with a group of guys. And so I started my first band probably when I was 10. And maybe you write some really terrible songs and have a lot of fun. That's the point, you know.
Speaking of writing terrible songs, we're gonna have you listen to Infernal Machine and get your thoughts.
Okay, let's hear Infernal Machine, yeah.
Okay, perfect. As Derek listened to our song, I couldn't help but feel like I was 15 again, flooded with that raw, unfiltered excitement. There we were, sitting with a real professional musician, and he was actually listening to our track. It was surreal.
It's a good tune. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's see if we can't, what would happen if we updated this song and, hey, let's finish this thing. What do you think?
He offered some great notes, then had us jam a bit to get a feeling of the song and our vision. After that, he sent us on our way. And as we walked out, it hit us. Deep down, we still believed it. We had a late 90s metal hit on our hands. I like how you did it so slowly. Because the viewer's gonna be like, wait, what's he doing? And then it's like, trash. Okay, so the song needed a lot of work, but thankfully with the help from Derek, we knew we could polish the song into something that sounds professional. At this point, my brother Hudson headed back into the studio to record the singing.
Infernal Machine! Infernal Machine!
And do that again, then I can shift that one over. You see what I mean?
Okay. Infernal Machine!
And after hours of hard work, the song was officially finished.
What I'm holding in my hand is 26 years in the making.
And of course, you had to burn it to CD because we're about to do what we used to do, and that is pop this in, listen to it on our blown out speakers, drive around aimlessly until we get bored, and have a damn good time.
I'm ready to be a 90s kid for one last night.
So am I. Pop it in. As we drove around listening to the finished version of Infernal Machine, I was reminded of the hours and hours we spent doing this exact same thing as teenagers. Just driving around, talking, headbanging to the music, and pondering what the future held for us. The word nostalgia is thrown around a lot these days, and I don't know if I've ever truly understood the feeling until now. This whole experience has been a wild ride, and in certain moments it felt like I was transported back in time. It's hard to define what getting older feels like. In your mind, you're still the same person you were as a kid, yet the world around you changes. But that's part of growing up, and every new generation will look back on their younger days with the same feeling. But of course, the time they grow up in is never going to quite top the 1990s. If you made it this far into the video, you're a true 90s kid, and I just want to say thank you. These videos take a lot of work, and I continue to try to expand upon them. So if you want to give us some support, you can check out our fitness app called Buff that we just released on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Now, I don't have a crew, so I handle all this myself. The writing, lighting, camera, and editing, which is why these videos take a lot more time than normal. But I do have to give special thanks to my brother Hudson and my girlfriend Michaela for helping me on this project when I needed them most. I'd love to hear your stories from the 90s, and also any recommendations for the next era we can do. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a different decade.